Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we explore the future and what this means for your leadership. We ask the big questions. What's happening on the horizon? What does this mean for us? And most importantly, what skills do I need now for leadership of the future? It's time to explore. Let's go.
Well, hello there. It's Zoe, your friendly neighborhood Canadian, Australian leadership futurist and novelist. Woohoo! Yes, lots of exciting things happening around the traps at the moment. Oh my goodness, there is this really cool thing that came out. This is in the Planet Human. MIT Chatbot has created a future self chatbot, which means you can dump some information in there about yourself and it presents you with an avatar of yourself at the age of 60, which when you're closer to 60 is no big deal. So that's me. I'm closer to 60 now. But when you're 18 to 35, 60 feels like you can't even conceive of it. That's what I remember about being between 18 and 35. 50 and 60 was like, oh, distant future. And you can have a conversation with your future self. And you're looking at yourself at that age going, right, what do I need to do now? What's important to me to get to safely and well at the age of 60? What I find fascinating about this is twofold. One, the technology is accelerating and changing really quickly. Having an avatar of yourself is going to be useful in so many different contexts in terms of showing up independently at meetings to be a resource to others, particularly if you have a body of work that you want to help spread around the world where it doesn't rely upon you showing up individually because there's only so much of you to go around. Preserving memories of loved ones, whole bunch of stuff. I explore a lot of that actually in the Olympus Project, Olympus Bound, and upcoming novel Olympus Rising, which is book number 3 in the Gaia Enterprises series. And the repercussions are pretty profound in terms of how we relate to ourselves and AI and robotics. Doppelbots in the novels are humanoid robots which have this kind of avatar self plugged into them. So you can actually have a chat to someone who is either living or dead based on all their memories and all the content that they've got. So really cool. So that was the first thing that's cool about the MIT chatbot. The second thing is this has been like a personal development exercise. Been around for years and years, 30 years more. I think I remember thinking or being introduced to this concept of having a chat to your 80-year-old self or 60-year-old self at the time. And asking it questions, what would my 80-year-old self say about this current situation? And it gives us context. The other really useful thing about this from a leadership point of view is it helps us to think long term. And that is something that we are terrible at. Our teams are terrible at it. Us as individuals are terrible at it. So that's really cool. The link is in the show notes. On Planet Zoe, I'm trying to stay warm and I'm praying for snow. Yeah, this time of year I kind of go hibernating and it's a quiet time in my practice generally in terms of client-facing work and everybody seems to buckle down, particularly in Canberra. Nights are early and the dawn takes forever to come around and everybody sort of goes shivers and talks about the weather. If it's snowing, awesome. The other thing that I'm doing is continuing the research and starting to structure the outline of my next non-fiction book, my first one since 2020, tentatively called Power Games. That's its working title. And I am super pumped for what we are going to do with this particular book. We're going to launch it on a Kickstarter. That's my intention at the moment. Here we are in July, not for many months yet. It is going to have a secondary book to it too. So there'll be a primary nonfiction book. There will be a fiction book associated with it, but it will be a choose your own path kind of book. That was me getting super pumped and excited about that. And potentially a board game or card game affiliated with that. So lots of really cool stuff coming with the Power Games book. Also happening is Grace Under Fire, my latest program that's going to kick off in September. We are getting ready to open the doors in about 2 weeks. You can sign up for early notification to get the special launch price for that. It's about how to exercise your power without losing your soul. It's so you can become seen, heard, and valued. Hone your power and get promoted. You'll learn how to get visible, develop your voice, and expand your vision. So this is about individuals learning how to exercise power in organizations, and also about how we need to reframe our working or implementation of power across organizations. And that is going to feed into the book as well. That's coming. All right. Yeah. So that's all that's happening on Planet Zoe. My question for you this week is, how can we lead better in complexity? How can we lead better in complexity? And my guest today, oh my goodness, she's amazing. Her name is Louise Mowbray. She is a speaker and consultant and author, and she's written my favorite book this year for futurist thinking for leaders. It's called Relevant, Future-Focused Leadership. She packs a lot of frameworks into this book. So it's a really useful handbook if you're thinking about how to think about the future and you want to do it better. Awesome. I wish I'd written this book. That's amazing. Relevant and future-focused leadership. So let's get into it. We talk a lot about the future, power, ethics, and what we need to do to extend our reach in leading through complexity. Okay, let's get on with it. All the way from Johannesburg, South Africa. Welcome to the show, Louise Mowbray.
Thank you, Zoe. It's really wonderful to be here.
I am super pumped to have you on the show. I thought your book, Relevant, was the most thorough and comprehensive guide to advanced leadership thinking that I've come across in a long, long time. It's like, I was like, if I'm going to write another book, you've already written it. So thank you so much for doing it. It's a testament of a wide-ranging set of issues and parameters and frameworks that any leader who wants to be a forward-thinking leader can really use. So huge congratulations to the book. I love it. I think it was fantastic and really well done. And not too onerous to read either. Like, it's not just weighing you down. It's very practical, easily summarized. So there you go. That's a lot of praise for your book. So thank you for writing that, first of all.
That means a lot coming from you, Zoe. So thank you.
You're welcome. So let's talk about this. Futurism. How did you get into this line of work? And what was the biggest hurdle you've had to overcome in your career in this line of work?
Yeah, this line of work almost found me. I started my career in London, investment banking, technology sectors, then global executive search. And that was kind of the golden thread that connected me to really understanding how business works, how culture works, how people work. And lived in the Middle East for a few years, went back to London, and I thought, I'm only doing what I'm really deeply passionate about. And of course, the next question was, what on earth does that look like? And one of the key things that I'd absolutely loved in executive search was understanding how people fit into organizations, what their stretch might be, culture and growth. You know, growth has kind of become it became a buzzword and probably got thrashed way too much, and is sort of shifting language along with everything else at the moment. But when I look at people and organizations, I just remember thousands of people passing through my hands on executive search who were unbelievably well equipped. They had, the right degrees, they'd joined the right companies, made their way up, the sign above the door was perfect. And yet they'd reached a point where they were looking for more, but just didn't know what that thing was. And there was a lot of discontent, and when you really see it in executive search, you also feel the market's moving before, a lot of other types of sectors do. And I realized that these extraordinary people just weren't hitting their mark. They hadn't fully stepped into their possibility, their potential. And when I started my business, I started coaching, I started speaking for business schools, and that kind of got my speaking career going, and working with executive teams. And then realized I needed a qualification about 5 years in, and my business will be 19 this May, on the 5th of May. So almost there. And I can still kind of call myself a teenager, which is great. But at the time, of course, the world was incredibly different to where we are today. And, the world's changed, but so too have we. And so too has how we do business. Fundamentally, people haven't changed. but how we go about doing what we need to do has shifted. And right now, I feel that we're sort of at a precipice. We're at the beginning of this whole new era of work set out before us. And fortunately, sort of about 2017 or so, I was invited to come and do a Futurism strategic foresight course, which I took. And I absolutely loved it. I remember sitting in that, 4-day intensive and thinking, oh my gosh, there's a name for how I think. It was almost like coming home. And then I retook that same course again at the beginning of last year because I thought the pandemic had made me a little rusty, perhaps. So that kind of opened a whole world that actually I hadn't realized was full of tools and models and frameworks and ways of thinking of philosophy, a way of understanding and playing with the future, perhaps in ways we hadn't thought of before, or I hadn't thought of before. And realizing too that, of course, futures has been around for a very long time, decades, and is rooted in academia. I didn't have time to take a year and go and do an MSc, so that would have to suffice. And my focus is always working with people primarily, and then using all of the tools that I have available to me to help them to learn and grow and to build their organizations. And then a little later on, I knew there was a missing piece. And I'd done a whole lot of behavioral science stuff, which was very powerful in organizations and with leaders today. But the piece around complexity came along in the form of a course, which I took. And I finally realized I had all of the jigsaw puzzles. The missing piece was there. So, yeah, I mean, the coaching thing was interesting because I'd been coaching until about 2010 for at least 5 years. And realizing I needed a qualification, of course, I thought ICF, it's the global gold standard. And then, of course, the tricky part was finding a route to ICF. And I happened upon conscious leadership. And that immediately I realized that I would need to take a deep personal dive, and that it was the foundation of all leadership. I mean, every year we almost have a different flavor. Courageous leadership, I think, is kind of the thing of the moment. We've had empathetic leadership for, the last couple of years, strategic leadership. There are always various different flavors that sort of peak at different times. And, having coached and worked in this space for so long, as you have, we've kind of seen those bubbles come along and move along. But I realized that conscious leadership really is the foundation of it all. Whatever the flavor that arrives next year. And it's been the golden thread that's run its way through my business ever since.
How would you define conscious leadership?
Very interesting. I mean, the search for consciousness, a way of hacking our consciousness, is as old as human beings are, humanity is. And it's a source of much debate. And of course, especially now around AI, will AI be conscious? So consciousness at its foundation is being aware of our inner and outer world. And I think Carl Jung said it best when he said, until you bring the unconscious to the conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So conscious leadership really is a step-by-step evolution and an internal sort of transformation, which then, of course, has an external transformational impact and effect. All of those around us, our teams, all of our stakeholders, teams, clients, business partners, investors, peers, whatever it may be. And conscious leaders have worked because, this doesn't necessarily come, it does come naturally to all of us. However, if we think about going through life and how our mental models, or what I like to think of as our lenses on the world, have conditioned us to think in certain ways, what conscious leadership does is create the space so that we can create space in our own minds between what's going on around us. And there are always crises, there are always problems to solve, there are always issues to deal with. What's going on around us and what's going on inside our own internal dialogue. And for me, when you witness a conscious leadership in action in business, it's quite beautiful. It's quite noticeable. So for me, conscious leadership isn't just a shiny new app that we've stuck onto the idea of leadership. It's a shift in our operating systems, how we understand the world, how we deal with people, how we deal with circumstances, and just that creation of some space in our minds where we can make active, conscious choices, despite how we think or feel, our programming, the eons of stuff that's been, I guess, solidified in our own minds. And there's a lot of neuroscience. So it sounds, I often joke and say it sounds like I'm selling some sort of guru weekend away. And yes, it can be that too, but it's also based on neuroscience, behavioral science, brings everything together, adult development theory, all of the stuff that is the smarter stuff that we might use to understand ourselves better and our impact on the world around us.
So there's obvious advantages to moving towards a conscious leadership practice, which, if I summarize correctly, is awareness of inner world and outer world and making decisions based on that instead of our subconscious programming, which is reactive to our environmental concerns. So there's an advantage to it. Why then? And this is a question I've been pondering. And as I do research for my next nonfiction book on power, why then do some people, some leaders, don't bother? They're very happy staying in their own lane with their own worldview and becoming power mongers, say, for example, and being unconscious leaders because there's an attraction or a benefit to that, even though there are huge downsides. So I'm curious about your perspective. If there are huge advantages to conscious leadership, why do some people avoid it?
Yeah, I think in order to even contemplate that question, and it's lovely to have a debate around these things, we need to understand our history. So if we think of how we're operating in our businesses today, ultimately everything is based on the machine metaphor, which came out of the Industrial Revolution. In other words, people are capable of X. We look at productivity and all our measurement tools and how we've been trained, and even if we think of sort of the classic leadership theory that has been around for the last couple of decades, most of us emerged from that time. So it was the de facto, it was the norm, and we can also compare it to perhaps the type of strategy that we might have put together 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, pre-pandemic, where there was some predictability about our world of work. And yes, naturally conscious leaders, and there are plenty if we just stop and have a look around and start to get a sense of it, have always been around. And my simple sort of measurement of leadership is not some kind of obvious traits, but it's why people follow others. Why do we choose to follow somebody else? And if we look at conscious leadership and conscious leaders and how they operate in the world, what's really interesting is that they attract, like anything, naturally attract people who are drawn to that type of thing. The interesting thing today is that, bearing in mind what we've been through in the last 4 years or so, 4 or 5 years or so, I think we're finally realizing that the old operating systems, or the things that have always worked, and I say always, I think of my parents, I think of my generation, and of course, probably half of the next. And what worked before is just not working in our business lives anymore. The pandemic did something rather extraordinary to all of us. It shifted our connection to leaders in business, in government, in society, and almost untethered us from the ties that bound us before, unconsciously, without even thinking about it. And a lot of people experienced a real trust deficit over the time of the pandemic. People didn't necessarily do what was appropriate or caring or human under extreme stress and pressure. And the other thing is that I got very much involved in a book which I co-authored at the beginning of last year called Uncertainty. And when I took a deep dive into that, the research around the pieces that I, along with 30 other authors, I mean, it was probably the most collaborative thing I've ever done. But when I took a deep dive into this question of complexity and uncertainty, we absolutely have to understand that the last 4 years have just been a series of complex situations, extremely complex, more complex than we've ever experienced before. And wherever you have complexity, you have uncertainty. It's a given, because nothing is predictable. We can't rely on old ways of, putting our strategy together and having it unfold in the way that we might expect, give or take 20%, and a few adjustments en route. We had a pandemic, we had lockdown that changed our relationship to work and our place in it, and then of course we've had 2 regional wars which have a global impact. We might think it's something happening somewhere else, but just walk into a supermarket and fill your basket and you'll feel the impact of that when you get to pay for what's in your trolley or your basket. And of course, ChatGPT was released for most people and unexpectedly. So suddenly that shifted the convergence of technologies, how they might play out in our roles, what it means for the future of learning, education, and jobs. And we're just adding constantly to, it's almost like having a pot simmering on the stove, where we're just constantly adding extra bits of uncertainty into that until we can't see the difference between things. It's just this brown pot of stew. So wherever we have complexity, we have uncertainty. And wherever we have uncertainty, and there's some great papers around this that have been published in recent years, we also have an acute stress response. So I'm not talking about I'm stressed, gosh, I've got too much on my plate, I can't run fast enough. I'm talking about an acute stress response, which is fight, flight, freeze, or appease. And that's produced a situation where globally, across the board, in business, wherever you have a group of people, you can be sure that 38% of the people that you're with, that group, that team, are reporting burnout symptoms. And 50% are this is all self-reporting mental health issues. So suddenly we're dealing with people who, if you think about it, when we have that fight, flight, freeze, or appease, a whole bunch of brain chemicals shut down. So possibility thinking, ideation, innovation, all of that goes out of the window. And we're literally trying to survive. So when I think of leaders going into a business situation, working with their team and expecting the same kind of results from people, really there's a lack of consciousness around that. We need to understand that we're faced with a very different situation. So how can one actually lead in a situation like this unless we ourselves have raised our levels of consciousness? And we are, as I said before, it's our inner world, our outer world. It's an internal transformational impact, which has an external transformational impact on the people around us. So that sensitivity, that connection with others is so important right now. It couldn't be more important and urgent.
So we're living in very complex times, and what worked then in terms of then being industrial, predictable, and contained doesn't work now. So we're kind of almost having our hand forced by us, if I've understood your explanation correctly. And in reading your book and also in my own work, I know that to navigate complexity, we need to make sense of complexity. And one way to do that is to think and operate in systems. But not a lot of people are familiar with that. How do you get people to see and develop their ability to see and operate in systems as leaders?
Great question, Zoe. And I think we might be unfamiliar with the concept of systems thinking, and yet we are systems thinkers naturally. And we can't talk about systems thinking without talking about complexity. They're inextricably intertwined. So we are complex systems. Our immune systems are complex systems. How in every aspect of our body, all of the systems in our bodies are complex systems. And wherever you're sitting now, right now, listening to this, you are sitting in a complex system. And you're probably going to get in your car or get on public transport. And those are complex systems in terms of how you get around. And even perhaps listening to this on your phone or on the internet, that's a complex system. So I think that we've got to take any unknowns out of the language and kind of democratize things in a way of understanding. Is that, systems are absolutely, the universe is a system, our families are systems, our communities, our organizations, our suppliers, our supply chains, everything is a system. And everything has a level of complexity. So systems thinking is really about taking a little step back and having a look at the component parts of your system today. What is it made up of? And then also beyond that, so we keep moving out. What is the political system that you're sitting in? How is it impacted by global systems? I mentioned earlier on, of course, over the last 4 years, we've almost had an annual event that speaks into yet more complexity and unknowns and uncertainty. And if we just think of this year, for example, we have something like 72 global elections going on. The first one happened in January in a small place called, I think it's El Salvador, and where the dictator, tiny country, proclaimed himself the coolest dictator on the planet and won. And we have a whole lot of sequences of events that we know are likely to happen this year, even if the dates for elections haven't been called. And there will be consequential actions and reactions from country leaders, from business leaders, from people involved in sourcing materials around the world. So that impact on all of us might not be direct. It might be direct, or part of it might be direct and the majority indirect. But the way to actually help ourselves to begin to develop the systems thinking muscle, and I think of it as a muscle. It's like any neural pathway. It's neural pathways are just wonderful. We can't ever kill an old one, an old habitual way of being and doing. But what we can do is build a new one, better, stronger. So when I think of systems thinking, understanding complexity, working with sense making and wayfinding, all of these things sound a little foreign to us, and yet they all come completely naturally to us. We just haven't needed them as much as we need them today and well into the future. So probably the easiest way to work with this is to start working with some futures tools. And there's just one that springs to mind that is fantastic, for decision making, for opening up our ideas about what the world looks like, what might have a future impact, what's happened in the past and where we are today, what's going on. And it's called the Futures Triangle. And it was developed by a professor who's the UNESCO first chair of futures. And it's simple, it's easy, and you can use it for absolutely anything. And if you can imagine a triangle with, obviously it's 3 corners, you've got one which is about the pull of the future. The second is about the push of the present. And the third is the weight of the past. So take any situation that you're involved in, or a decision that needs to be made, or something your team is grappling with, or something that you're grappling with yourself, whether it's in business or personal, and consider all those aspects in detail. So the pull of the future is where we put our anchor into where we want to be in the future. And we often think of this as vision, in corporate sort of sense. But think of it as where you what excites your imagination about where you want to be in the future. And use your imagination, have a think about all of the amazing things that are going on at that time that you want to make happen. And put an anchor in that for yourself. And between yourself and that pull of the future is this golden thread that keeps you oriented towards where you're heading, because stuff happens every day and we can get thrown off course. But that's kind of a big picture idea of what you want life to be, or where you want your organization to be, or what you want to get out of anything, really. Then we've got to look at the weight of the past. And as the term suggests, it's weighty. What are we carrying with us? Old ideas, myths, metaphors, our lenses on the world, our mental models, our biases, our automatic interpretation of life through our own experience, our own lived experience, and that of our parents and grandparents and families and friends and what have you. All of this stuff was carried around. And we've got to go through that and have a look and say, well, which bits still serve me going into the future and which bits can I let go of? It doesn't serve me to have to carry this any longer. It's no longer appropriate. It's no longer relevant for where I'm going. And then, of course, we've got the push of the present, and that we have, very little control over. So what's going on globally? What's going on socially? Elections, supply chains. A ship is bombed in the Black Sea, and shipping is rerouted around Cape Town, South Africa. Of course, the price of everything just pops right up. So there are constant things happening all over the world, wherever you happen to be, whatever your area of focus, that are going to impact your ability to actually make your way through. And what are the technologies? What are the convergent technologies that are popping? We know that with the pull of the future, there are a whole bunch of things happening technology-wise that we can expect to emerge at some point, or are already here, but whether humans want to adopt it or not is another question. That's a whole nother debate. But all of these things are coming together. And so the first thing is to develop your self-awareness, your awareness of what's going on in your immediate world and beyond that. So I would just put one word on all of that, which we've heard a lot about, but very few people relate it to systems, and that's a deep curiosity. So the lovely thing about curiosity, it's a bit like empathy. We can relate. We don't have to agree. We don't have to take it on board, but just get curious about all sorts of things that are going on out there and frame it in the past, the present, and the future. And that begins the process of exercising this thing that comes naturally to us, this systems thinking, because we're starting to think in interconnected wholes rather than bits and pieces. I think that, we've all been well trained in isolating a problem and fixing it. And for me, that's kind of the difference between complexity and complicated. And that's another really important point when it comes to systems. We've thrown the word complex around endlessly over the last 4 or 5 years, longer. And yet very few people understand the difference between what is complex and what's complicated. And they need it to be treated very differently. So complexity is actually emergent. It's evolving. And when we take any issue that we're exploring or considering or trying to wrap our heads around, we need to actually pull out those parts that are complicated, because complicated we can throw frameworks, models, tools, experts, money at, and we can solve the problem. There is a beginning to it and an end. We might not be able to afford to, or we might not be able to find the right expertise, but it's kind of solvable. Whereas complexity, we need to watch and wait, and almost, I think of this jokingly as stalking it. Keep your eye on it, see how it shifts and changes, what emerges, before we can actually make any decisions. And I think the biggest error that a lot of leaders make today is they go rushing in, applying frameworks, models, tools, and money and experts, trying to solve complexity. And by its nature, complexity is not solvable in those ways. So it's starting to develop a little bit of language around this and understanding, starting to exercise this, the muscle of our ability to think in these ways. And that for me is absolutely crucial at the moment.
I love that. And as you were doing the big build up to using your most favorite tool, I'm like, oh, which one is it going to be? And I love that you picked the futures triangle. That's really fabulous. And it's a very useful framework to help people just put structure to which can feel to something that feels structureless in some ways. And it gives us something through which we can exercise our thinking and our sense making. I'm curious what you think, how you see how tools like AI, and you mentioned ChatGPT earlier, so generative AI as an example, how that is going to help or hinder how leaders can see and operate with systems thinking. If
I knew the answer to that, Zoe, we'd share it. It's a very good question. I think, AI has been around for a long time, decades and decades. And we really need to think of AI that we've been using long before generative AI and large language models popped into our world as ways of connecting one type of thing that needed to be done with an automated way of doing it. So we think of it as automation. And there are 5 types of automation. I don't want to get into the details right now. It would probably take us a little too long. But if we think of automation as being part of our lives already, and even if we think very simply, let's think of supply chain, and IKEA is a great example. So the technology is already there and well developed in looking at how we can do sort of predictive analysis on supply chain sourcing and delivery for, say, manufacturing or something like that. When we think of AI and sense making, as long as the data, and we've been talking about this endlessly since ChatGPT popped into our lives, and all of the ramifications on that and the development that's happening at the moment, I mean, it's quite extraordinary and it's just constant. Systems thinking is being able to think for yourself in this more holistic way. And of course, underpinning all of that are data points. So if I think of some of the futurists that, I think of Amy Webb, for example, who is the quant futurist. In other words, very data-driven, but using these tools to create some sense of what might come. And her annual report is downloaded, I think last year it was downloaded 1 million times. And she consults with governments and major organizations, and ordinary people like me read her stuff to give us a sense of, broadly speaking, what's happening, what is likely to happen, what is maturing across, in terms of technologies, convergent technologies, across all sorts of arenas and across the sectors. So I think there are lots of ways of pulling in technology, not just generative AI and large language models, because they are notoriously unreliable in terms of the quality of data. So I know that most major organizations at the moment, the big debate, the big focus is all about making sure that the data that they build their tools on is clean. And we know it's not. So I would say, all of this, take it with a pinch of salt. I think that the AI that we're already using in our businesses obviously has been tried and tested and is built on major organizations' data and their specific universe. So yeah, I would be quite careful about using generative AI today, large language models, to produce the reliable data that one needs. So you start off with your systems thinking, you work out what your universe looks like, where you're going, what you don't need to take with you, and a constant curiosity about what's going on right now. But then be very careful about how you underpin the data points that you make decisions on.
Mm. I think that's really sound advice. Thank you for that. Now, Louise, are you ready for the Fast Five?
I am, Zoe.
Okay, let's do it. Speaking of the future and technology, what is the future technology you most want right now?
I'd love clean data in AI as a start. That would be the foundation of all things. The other thing I've often thought about is sending you my hologram, Zoe, to come and chat with you. I don't know whether you'd like that, or perhaps our holograms could meet somewhere virtual.
I'm down with that. I have holos in my sci-fi books as well, so they're always connecting with their holos.
There we go. Okay. So that would probably be one thing that would be quite fun.
Okay. You're the first one to mention holographs, so I'm pretty excited by that. Number 2, best tip you ever got for leadership?
Connect. Build relationships, connect. Our networks will always be the foundation of our growth, really. So spend as much time nurturing those connections as you might do, on other things.
That's great. Number 3, what's one problem in the workplace you'd love to wave a magic wand and have be fixed right now?
Yeah, I'd like to help people to quiet that acute stress response. it's causing havoc in people's lives and it's causing a lot of damage. Not irreversible, but it's definitely not supportive of a healthy culture globally. People are divided. It's very easy to polarize people when, you're constantly making something the enemy. I would wave a magic wand and I would take away that desperate need we always have for that certainty that locks people into that way of thinking and help them to dance more lightly with what's going on around us.
Love it. Thank you. Number 4, thumbs up or thumbs down? Who's a leader you want to give a thumbs up to or a leader you want to give a thumbs down to?
Gosh, I don't know if you can sense the huge sigh I'm taking at the moment. I think the founder of Patagonia did the right thing. For example, last year he practically, put his organization into trust, kept enough shares that, the family would be able to make the right decisions for the planet. So, on their website, if you go and have a look, I think there's a tiny little byline in lowercase that says, the earth is our only shareholder now. So rather than floating the company or sort of going the usual route, he decided to gift it back to the earth and it's in trust. And it's, a huge turnover company, very successful organization. So that for me was an example of amazing conscious leadership, natural conscious leader who spent his life ensuring that he protects both the planet and the people who work for his organization. So that would be the right. The wrong, unfortunately, my list is deep. I don't quite know even where to start. So I'm just going to say it's deep and I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. Number 5, favorite leadership or podcast, something that has deeply impacted you.
Well, yours, of course, Zoe.
Of course. Thank you.
I think there are a couple that I really enjoy. I'm quite prolific. I listen to a lot of things. And the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies I always find that pretty interesting. That's worth tuning into. And then there is a podcast called Win-Win, hosted by somebody called Liv Boeree. And I just love her explorations into all of the topics that are going to have an impact on us today and into the future to some degree, because we don't know yet. The most extraordinary thing about technologies is here I am saying, I'd love to send you my hologram. And how do you feel about that? And, a lot of these technologies are already here. Brain-computer interfaces, I think, will definitely start emerging in teaching environments, our schools and educational environments. But do we want them? So technology has always found a way to, human beings are just amazing. We're so innovative. We're full of ideas. Our imaginations are rich. And of course, will these things be adopted is the question. Listening to people like listening to the Win-Win podcast with Liv Boeree and various others always excites my imagination, and it also brings me back down to earth. Like the question is, what will people adopt, and what will disappear somewhere or be a contributing factor to some other technology further down the line. Those are probably the two.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. That was the Fast 5. The Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast is proudly sponsored by the Amplifiers Academy. It is an online self-paced leadership development program that you can join at any time and progress at your pace. There are very short video lessons, great checklists and resources and recommendations and book summaries, all there to help boost your leadership thinking and abilities. We focus on leading strategy, leading culture, leading change, and leading performance. So if you want a go-to resource that can help boost your strategic abilities immediately, check us out, Amplifiers Academy, on the ZoeRouth.com website. See you there. I love that you mentioned brain-computer interfaces. I've put that in my novels as well. One of my leaders gets BCI, and I'm exploring how that's impacting on her and her relationships as a result of that decision. So that's an interesting one. I kind of think people will want it, but I think the dangers are pretty significant. So we'll see. Yeah, we'll see how that plays out. I would like my self-driving car personally. That's definitely something I would like. We'll see how we go. All right. So I haven't managed to cover every question. What question have I not asked that you'd like to answer?
So it's really interesting because I think you and I could explore just about anything and have a conversation about it. I guess the question that I would like to ask, if I may.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Perhaps something that we can discuss between the two of us is, what do you think leaders need in the next today? Or let's just talk about the next decade. It's very difficult to think beyond that.
Okay. Well, you named it already, is that sense of deep curiosity. That's the first thing I'd say is curiosity. Leaders absolutely need that. They need a deep sense of connection. You also mentioned that as the biggest tip that you got. So the ability to see things and the ability to connect with others. And the other aspect, I'm trying to think what my third C was. I believe it's courage. Doesn't sound quite right. I can't remember my own model.
Yeah. Sounds good. Courage, yeah, absolutely. Do something, try something we haven't.
Curiosity, care, and compassion. No, curiosity, courage, and compassion. Those could be the 3 C's.
Or you may have 4.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, that's right. Well, care and compassion are linked, so they kind of subsume underneath them. For me, it's really about expanding perspective. So if I had to boil it all down, I'd say, and that's what People Stuff, my 4th book, was all about, really. It was about helping leaders expand their perspective, their ability to see more so they can lead better, so that we can look far, go deep, and reach wide is the thing I think will hold us in good stead. And that's really at the heart of futures thinking, if you like, is the ability to expand our perspective and to see ourselves, the world around us, in its greater complexity, so we can make more sensitive and sensible decisions. So best of the heart, best of the mind, as Cindy Wigglesworth would put it, I think is what we need to keep harnessing. So all the work that I do with leaders is about expanding their perspective on self, others, and the world. And the ability to navigate that complexity as a result of that is what I think we need mostly. Creativity. That was the other C. Curiosity, creativity, and compassion. Yeah.
There we go. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's one thing to see, and it's the next thing is the ability to respond to that in a creative, innovative way, I think is something that's essential. And you and I spoke before we hit record, I believe, about how leaders find it difficult to use their imagination about what's coming and what's happening around them, which is why science fiction is so useful, because that's a lot of the innovative thinking or the creative thinking is there. So you get invited into a world for you to explore, to see what's on offer there for you as a leader and how you might respond compared to how the characters respond. So that was my long-winded answer to what I think leaders need moving forward.
Yeah, very powerful. Zoe, I think you and I are much aligned in terms of our thinking. And the other thing is to also, perhaps not give ourselves too hard a time, because when it comes to the World Economic Forum every year publishes the top 10 skills skills, traits, attributes that leaders or people need today in business. And, last year, I think it was analytical thinking first, creative thinking second. And they also give a prediction for the next 5 years that creative thinking will be first and analytical thinking will be second. And I can't remember the order of the others. And it's very interesting because if we look at how we've been conditioned, these are our lenses on the world. We can be forgiven for not employing our creativity, broadly speaking. And this nature of being in flow and what creativity looks like is really important. And I've written quite a lot about that because, if we think about our education systems, often we're divided between humanities or STEM topics. And, STEM topics can promise, decent salary or decent level of living standards. And, humanities and creatives, well, you might be a struggling artist. And that, kind of way of thinking still persists long into our, education systems and what have you. And what we're learning today is that we need both. So, we need medicine with philosophy. We need AI with ethics. We need these combinations of innately human capabilities because of the nature of the world that we're working in, and it becoming ever more present, omnipresent in terms of our interaction with technology every day.
There's two things I would add to your comments also, and thinking about what leaders need next. It's interesting how you just wove it in to your last statement. Ethics, I think, is super important. So as I'm doing research around power, ethics plays into that. How we exercise power. We need an ethical framework to do that well. Otherwise, we have an absence of ethics, and that leads to tyranny and all sorts of oppressive behavior. So I think none of that lists that you see published ever talk about ethical decision-making, which I find extraordinary, really. And it's now coming out in the conversations around AI that we can't have these AIs running around without some sort of ethical framework. I'm like, well, what about the leaders running around right now? So I think ethics should be an emerging central aspect to what we're doing as leaders. That would be my first comment. And the second one, to your point about what do we do, STEM or art? Why can't we need both of them? And Griffin, I think her last name is. She's a writer on Substack. She's a fantastic writer. I'll put a link to her Substack in the show notes. And she's talking about optimistic and utopias for the future. And she posed a question recently to her community about how do we encourage the modern Renaissance? How do we get artists to be sponsored like they were during the Renaissance so that we can have art and creativity come back and be valued, as opposed to the devaluation of artists that is happening, let's say, in the publishing world, where writers get very little for their work and they are at the mercy of the big platforms. So I think that's an interesting opportunity. And I don't see it just as a possibility, but as an opportunity with the change of geopolitical power struggles and the rise of techno nations, which means large organizations like Microsoft, Google, et cetera, who have more wealth than many nations put together. There's an opportunity there for them to become sponsors of the modern Renaissance, I think, potentially. And there's an opportunity there to bring back the elevation of the artists as big contributors to society. So those would be my two additional comments around what's needed next: power and ethics and the modern Renaissance.
Definitely. And I think I'd dedicate an entire chapter to ethics, and then, of course, ethics and AI. And it's the subject of a lot of discussion at the moment, at least in the touch points that I have in various different groups. So what's really interesting about all of that is it fundamentally has to come back to this anchor of humans being at the center of technology, not the other way around. And AI kind of is the star of the show. And yet IA, intelligent augmentation, is really, in terms of the focus, it's the redirect. So yeah, things are always exciting, bright, shiny, new, exciting stuff. That's the nature of our world. It's the nature of humanity. We love stuff like that. And fundamentally, at the root of it all, we need to enshrine humanity. So, if I think of leaders and the decisions that they're faced with today, ensure that whatever you do has an ethical true north. And I've written about the different types of ethics and the different combinations and how to consider things, in relation to the types of decisions that you need to make today. Make sure that it's a model of intelligent augmentation and not the other way around, that humanity is at the center, because this is only the start. I mean, what we're seeing in terms of the next, I don't know, I just think of this is almost sort of the new era of work. And I think that without a doubt, I mean, let's talk again in 3 years, 5 years, well, sooner than that, I hope. But, and let's kind of explore this thing, because I think that without a doubt, human beings and their unique capabilities, these incredible things that just come naturally to us, that perhaps we haven't celebrated or highlighted or brought into our day-to-day business lives, that will become the place of value in the future. Because most people's jobs, especially if they're professions or perhaps knowledge workers, or even looking at sort of people working perhaps in factories, or at least parts of their job will become automated, simply because, of course, technology can compute, can reason, can actually calculate far more accurately and faster than a human being can. So where is the value? And we know that if you run the same question through various different AI, Gen AI, LLMs today, unfortunately, we're starting to see that the answers are very similar to every other platform. In other words, AI is literally generating from itself. And we're starting to move. So what is true knowledge? What is clean information? Where has wisdom been lost in our quest for automation? And wisdom, I also wrote a chapter about wisdom because I've always been intrigued. When somebody walks into a room, when wisdom's arrived and when it's left, whether it's at a dinner party, I don't know, some meeting, any meeting in business. And we know when there's a lack of it because it just smacks of the mundane, frustration, going round in circles. So we need wisdom more than ever before. And what does that look like within ourselves? It's lovely to have these ideas on other people, those around us, but how can I cultivate this for myself? So probably just to leave one thing of urgency is that whoever you are, whatever you're doing in business and in life, focus on that inner growth so that your outer world matches.
Oh, I love it. That was fabulous. Louise, where can people find out more about you and follow you and engage with you?
So probably my website is a good place to start. I'm a great believer that the best things always start with a decent conversation. So, whatever you're up to, whatever your inquiry is, send me a note from my website or connect with me on LinkedIn. It's probably my preferred platform because that seems to be where the business stuff happens today. And otherwise, I would love it if you bought my book, but not only that, I would love it if you bought my book and let me know how it impacted you.
I love it. And your website is mowbraybydesign.com. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, fabulous. We'll put all the links in the show notes for everyone as well. Louise, thank you so much for coming on the show. I don't know what time it is there in South Africa, but I'm grateful for whatever stupid o'clock it is. I think it is in the morning there for you. And I appreciate everything that you've shared, which was full of plenty of wisdom. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Zoe. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Well, that was a wonderful conversation. And it was like two souls discovering like-minded thinkers and delighting in the alignment of values, principles, beliefs, and the focus on a future that is consciously informed. So conscious leadership and how we can see more to lead better is important. And I love that about my conversation with Louise. And in reading her book, I'm like, yes, yes, yes. Yes, this is needed. Yes, this is useful. Yes, this is practical. Yes, this is what leaders need. And it's rare that I get that resonant with another professional. So that was pretty exciting. In terms of my takeaway, I loved her explanation of the futurist triangle, the pull of the future, the weight of the past, and the push of the present. It's such a simple and useful tool to help us just make sense of what's going on around us. In terms of tip of the week, it's from People Stuff, Beyond Personality Problems, an Advanced Handbook for Leadership, which you can read the ebook for free when you sign up for my monthly newsletter, zoerouth.com. Click on blog and the sign up page is right there. So you can get free access to the ebook there. This section I'm going to read is from the conclusion of People Stuff, and I thought it was quite appropriate. In People Stuff, my wish is that you have tools for honing insight and skills to practice sensible and sensitive leadership. It is in your head, heart, and hands now. It's up to you to take the next best actions. I wish you courage and strength. and you don't have to do it alone. Leadership is a collective practice. It is not done in isolation, though it can be done throughout isolation, as during the COVID-19 lockdown, tongue in cheek. Leadership happens with others, through others, and for others. Why then get stuck feeling you are alone? All leaders need a posse. It's here we can test our perspective. It's here we can grind away rough edges with tough love feedback from supportive peers. It's here we can express our feelings without judgment to show up real and be renewed. If we are to master people stuff, we need people, our posse people. So how do you find such a posse pod? Create your own pod. Reach out to leaders you admire in your industry and out and suggest a get-together to share challenges, to recommend resources, and even just to catch up and have a yarn, a chat for non-Aussie readers. Join a pod. And you've joined this podcast. If you are listening to this show, you know that you are in the company of like-minded leaders who are interested in future-focused leadership that is conscious leadership, leadership that is wanting to understand who we are as humans, where we're going as a species and as a planet in the universe, and making strong, sensible, and sensitive decisions for the stewardship of our humanity and of our planet. If that's you, you're in the right place. You found your posse. There will be more on this coming up on the show. So I'm bubbling away in the background. I'm doing some reinvention, some refocusing for the show, how I can be of better service and value to you and your future-focused leadership journey. So more on that towards the end of July. Towards the end of July, beginning of August, I'll be making an announcement on the show about the future of the show and what you can take away from it. In the meantime, what's coming up next? A solo-sode. So deep reflection from yours truly about what's coming up next. What else? If you like the show, email me, zoe@zoerouth.com. If you like the show, tell others, forward an episode, talk about it at work, explore the ideas. And the other thing you might want to do is buy one of my books or read the ones I'm giving away for free on my website. People Stuff, as I mentioned. You can also read Terra Blanca Insurrection, the prequel to the Gaia series, or listen to the free audiobook version when you sign up to get notifications of the podcast. All right, without further ado, I wish that you live with grace, lead in service. And that means to live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast. To find out more about leadership of the future or to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.